Hello and welcome to our monthly Midday Cafe. My name is Danielle Fanfair, and I am privileged and so grateful to be able to serve as the new co-president, along with my teacher and my friend and my mentor, even though she won't receive that title, Reverend Clare Loughrige. We are so excited to represent the IEA Great Lakes region, or as we have dubbed it, anywhere near a lake. So if you are anywhere near a lake, you can sit with us. I'm so excited that you have joined us. The names on this participant list give me such joy, even as our guests are still coming in the room. Y'all are welcome in the room. I want to start with just a few announcements to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of ongoing opportunities to expand our community, to expand our knowledge, to expand our welcoming of ourselves and others, that the Enneagram gives us such an amazing source of wisdom to be able to do. So I'm gonna share a screen real quick so that we are able to see. We want you to join our newsletter. We want you to be aware of everything that is happening in our community. We want you to be in the know. And so there are a plethora of opportunities to learn and grow via our newsletter. As you can see, we have, of course, we make sure that you know what's coming down the pipeline for all of our midday cafes and our IEA GLR events, as well as opportunities for you to learn from trusted Enneagram professionals who really care about you and care about you learning and mastering the true essence that you are and welcoming and respecting that of other people. So our board member, Rosemary Horowitz, has her Discover Your Personality Type for Spiritual Growth workshop coming up. She also has a biweekly online group. We have an opportunity to learn from the Enneagram Institute of Ohio with their relationships workshop. The Motions of the Soul IEA accredited certification will change how you serve and love other people, as well as the Enneagram Spectrum certification training with Dr. Jerry Wagner, who is our esteemed founder of our chapter. We also are going to hear from the very beloved and wise and protecting of our intellectual capacity, Mario Sikora, and I'm very excited to hear from him. I want you to also check out our YouTube page. Every Midday Cafe is recorded and then uploaded to our YouTube page so that when you want to share the wisdom, share the love, and share all the tools that you've gained through this experience, you have immediate access to do so. All the links will be in the chat, as well as I want you to join our Facebook page. We are live on Facebook and we are active on Facebook. So that's a great resource if you want to integrate folks into your community and also learn from us there. So check your chat box in just a second for those links. And I want to kick it over to the Reverend Clare Loughrige so that we can get this party started.
Thanks, Danielle. And the reason that we kind of resist the whole idea of being the mentor is that when I watch the brilliant things that many of you on this screen are doing that maybe have learned with me or with someone else in the group, we're all learning from each other. And that is one of the great gifts of this Enneagram community, including our very special guest today, Mario Sikora. So you may or may not know Mario, but you're going to get to know him today or later if you're watching this on YouTube. Mario teaches a model of feeling, thinking, and doing, but his main emphasis is teaching individuals how to think clearly or use critical thinking skills. And, I was introduced to Mario kind of in a more intimate setting at the 2012 IEA conference. And this was back, Mario, when you were still the president of the IEA. Of course, you've served in many capacities, including, that revered position of former president of the IEA, but you're also the CEA of Awareness to Action International, and you train people all over the world, including Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. And then you have this cool podcast called the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. And so there's lots of dimensions to Mario. And but the one that I'll never forget is in 2012, when you were introducing the keynote speaker to the conference that year, who, you made a comment that just made me sit up straight in my seat. And it was about, and of course I have a bias, so I may have heard this through my own lens. But there was a mentioning of moving the Enneagram out of the church, and that it had been in the church for a long period of time. And your vision to help broaden the base of how the Enneagram was seen, in the world, was really a part of what you were doing. And yet I was allowed to speak at that conference. It was right after I wrote Motions of the Soul. And Jerry Wagner actually sponsored me and said, no, you're going to teach at this conference. I didn't have to fill out anything. He said, I want you to teach this. But then Mario was the president, and he's like, let's get it out of church. And I thought, oh, we're either going to be really good friends, or we're going to have some real challenges with each other, right? And then, and so I want to say first, welcome to someone who has challenged me, which I know you love. Someone who has made me take a look at another perspective that was not my wheelhouse in the Enneagram world at that time. And so I just want to say thanks personally for broadening my experience. I'll give you one more thing about Mario that will, I think, help you see who he is. I was not a big fan of all the subtype work that was out there until one day in one of the trainings that I went through with Mario, he talked about transmitting types. And he said, and he described the transmitting type, and I'm not going to get into that today, but I thought, well, that makes a lot more sense than sexual for me. And so it had another texture to it for me that gave me another way to see. So he challenged my thinking again, like a great leading with Enneagram style 8 teacher would hope to do. So I first want to say thank you. And that, so maybe you can say hi, and then I can tell them the final thing that brought you here today.
Well, hello, and it's nice to see you. I see some familiar faces here and some unfamiliar faces, so I'm looking forward to today's session. I always get nervous, Claire, when people start quoting me from years ago, because I can never remember what I said and who might have taken offense or how I meant something at the time. And so I'm glad whatever it was I said wasn't too damaging or alienating. So, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I never wanted to stop learning from you. And so that, thus here we are. I'm going to share my screen. You had a post up on Facebook, and it was something that, again, it's like the great Enneagram 8s among us. They just get us to sit straight up and pay attention and say, how can we engage in a conversation here? So this, I know I'm quoting you properly. And this was, I'm often asked why I don't teach the spiritual elements of the Enneagram, focusing instead on pragmatism and what some mistakenly perceive as a business-only approach to the system. And so you go on in such a masterful way that even Drew Mosier said you took us to church that day on Facebook, even though that was not your intention. Necessarily, but you talked about spirituality being powerful stuff and it getting into hands where there can be abuse of power and the damaging of individuals. But one of the things that I did not know about you is you were a seminarian. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I can actually share it in the newsletter post our time with you, but I would love to know the inspiration behind your rant that day on Facebook that was so enlivening and helpful for many of us to have a conversation. And maybe you even get us just a little peek into the seminarian of Mario, Sikora.
So, one of my favorite passages from literature is the opening paragraph of Moby Dick. Starts off with "Call me Ishmael," and Ishmael talks about how whenever he is away from sea for too long, he gets the urge to step into the street and start knocking people's hats off. And he knows that he has to kind of vent the spleen and get back to sea before he does any real damage. And so your use of the word rant was appropriate there. And it was sort of a reaction to my frustration at seeing people teaching the Enneagram and making claims about spirituality and religion that I did not feel that they were qualified to make. And my view that if anybody is going to be claiming to teach spirituality in a certain way, that they should have certain qualifications, and including some formal training and being part of a tradition and having some set of guardrails around them in a way to protect them, because we can start veering into some dangerous territory, and the world is filled with stories of people intending to do good, but ending up hurting and damaging people because they're in over their heads in what they're doing. So that was the inspiration behind what I wrote.
Yeah, and I never would have called it a rant, but you did in our last conversation. And so I really appreciated this, because what it did was it sparked for me this idea that in my human trafficking advocacy world, we talk about law enforcement and victim service agencies and faith agencies staying in their lane and doing the good work that they do and collaborating with others in such a way that we're actually working on behalf of survivors in a way that could work. Right. So when I think about the Enneagram, when I think of your critical thinking writing, I say, this is your lane. And I appreciate that you do kick it over to others that maybe you would say, this person could talk to you about this, and that we can kick it over to you and say, here's where I see this revered teacher in our midst as being helpful to the greater community. So lead on today, Mario, and take us through some thinking, and maybe even help all the Enneagram styles see how they can think clearly.
Okay, great. So again, thank you. And, so I'm thrilled to be here. And when Claire reached out to me, we got to talking about what is, something that I would like to talk about. And this idea of critical thinking came up because for me, so the Enneagram is a model of head, heart, and body, right? So it's how we think, it's how we manage and respond to our emotions, how we connect to people emotionally, and then how we engage with the world and perceive the world physically, in a sense, through. And in my experience, the heart and the body get addressed a lot in the Enneagram world. There's a lot of stuff about the somatic work around the Enneagram. There's a lot of stuff around emotions in the Enneagram world. But the piece that often gets left out is the head piece, okay? Practicing discernment, practicing rigorous critical thinking. And every spiritual tradition has an element of that, right? In Catholicism, it's the Jesuits, right, whose job it is to be the serious, rigorous, critical thinkers. In yoga, I think it's the Jnana yoga approach, which is again about the intellect. And so we can't have a skillful and effective approach to the world if we don't have skillful thinking, good critical thinking skills. And we can't do, full spiritual work if we're ignoring one of the three centers, okay? And people always ask me, well, why don't you talk more about the heart then and talk more about the somatic stuff? And I say, because there are other people doing that much better than I do, and I could. So learn that from them, and I can help you with these other things, okay? And as we go, okay? So what I'd like to do is share some slides with you all and some ideas. And I encourage you, if you have questions, to let me know, right? Raise your hand. I will try to save a little bit of time at the end for questions, but don't hesitate to reach out. I will say at the front, I'm not great at tracking things in the comment section, okay? So don't rely on me to, notice some comment that you're making. If you have a question there, feel free to raise your hand, all right? So with that, I'm gonna share some slides here, if you'll bear with me a second. Okay. I am awful at these things, so hang in there for a second. There we go. All righty. Can you all see that? All right. Great. Let me pull this up so I can see everybody's smiling faces here. All right. Okay. Oh, look at this. This moves. I didn't even know that. Okay. So, so we're going to talk about clear thinking in the Enneagram and why it matters. Okay. First of all, what it is, and then why it matters, particularly to our approach to the Enneagram. And in my model of working with the Enneagram, I have different sets of competencies, right? So there is one set that has to do with leadership relationships. And I call it leadership relationships and leadership thinking because I work primarily with leaders, but these things apply to everybody, not just leaders. Okay, that's really important. So the model that I use is to associate thinking in this sense with points 1, 7, and 4. Now, I know that's not the classic way that people think about the Enneagram, right? They think of the head center as the 5, 6, and 7, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, these are the points that represent some of the things that I think are important when it comes to understanding what skillful thinking is. Okay. At point 1, it is rigor. Okay. Good, effective, critical thinking skills. Now, what I'd like you to do for a moment is imagine this triangle of point 1, 7, and 4 as kind of an open-ended triangle with point 1 at the top. Okay, so, and what that double-ended arrow looks like is that we all have to understand how much rigor we should apply in a given situation. Okay, not everything requires a huge amount of rigor, right? If it's a $5 decision, should I spend this $5 or not? Well, I don't have to do a whole lot of research, right? I don't have to go Googling whether or not, this newspaper is worth buying or something. I either do it or I don't. But if it's a $500 or a $5,000 decision, then I'm going to exercise more rigor, okay? So circumstances require that movement up and down the arrow around rigor. Now, if it was only rigor, it wouldn't be that interesting. So kind of supporting that is curiosity and creativity. Right? Curiosity, point 7, creativity, point 4. Now, curiosity is just what it means, and what it says, an open-ended desire to know things, right? Just for its own sake. I am curious about what's happening over there. I'm curious about how they do things in China. I'm curious about, this, book or that book, right? Without some purpose to come out of it, right? I just want to know, even if I never do anything with that information. Now, what we mean by creativity here on the other side is, how do I bring something into being? How do I innovate? How do I take these things that I've learned and put them into practice in some interesting, useful way? Okay, because curiosity without creativity is kind of pointless, right? It might be interesting, but it doesn't get anything done. And likewise, creativity without curiosity means I might be creating things, but they're not very interesting and they're not very good. Okay. So these three elements together shape what I think are the qualities of good thinking. Now, I'm going to focus on the rigor part of this today, okay? And, have to save curiosity and creativity for another conversation, all right? Now, for years and years, I have been talking in the Enneagram world about the importance of critical thinking and having an effective or a skillful relationship with science when it comes to the Enneagram. And I want to be very clear about this. I am not suggesting that we need to prove the Enneagram scientifically. I don't think we can prove the Enneagram scientifically, nor do I want to, do I think it's necessary. Not all things that are useful can be proven through science, okay? But what I get frustrated by is when people make claims in the Enneagram world that are clearly contradictory to what we know through science or what we can know through science. So my view is the Enneagram should not be dependent upon science, but it shouldn't violate science either, okay? And when I point out to people sometimes that what they're saying violates what we know through science, a response I often get is, well, there are different ways of knowing things, okay? And that is absolutely true. And it gets into a very important word and a very important concept, and that word is epistemology, okay? And what epistemology means is it's the branch of philosophy that deals with how we know what we can know and how we can know that we know it. All right. So it's about theories of knowledge. It's the investigation into what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. All right. 2 + 2 = 4. Okay. It doesn't matter how we feel about that. I may not like it. Okay, it may offend me. It may be something I something I see to be a morally bankrupt assertion, but it is a fact. Okay, and so things like that fall into what we would call the objective domain of knowledge. Okay, and there are 2 domains of knowledge: the objective and the subjective. Okay, subjective experience, objective knowledge. We get into trouble when we conflate the 2, when we don't recognize there is a distinction. One is not better than the other, okay? I'm not saying by any stretch that subjective experience is not a good thing, okay? I like chocolate ice cream better than I do vanilla, okay? I think anybody who prefers vanilla probably has some issues in their past that, have left a scar on them, okay? I think John Coltrane's A Love Supreme is the greatest album ever made. Catherine, because she's flawed of character and mind, disagrees, but these are these are subjective things, okay? Understanding something is subjective is perfectly reasonable, okay? But we can't assume that I can let my opinions change the facts, all right? If you are seeking after truth, you have to understand this, and you have to respect that there are different domains of knowledge and that there are different tools for each one. Okay, so just to give an example here, right, of what we're talking about here, the objective domain are things like math, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, science, right, things that are falsifiable and that we can know through the scientific method. The humanities, things like archaeology, history, philosophy, the sciences, these are in the objective domain. Okay, we can have opinions about them, right, but they deal in facts rather than opinions. And then there's logic. Okay. Now, it's important to understand that when it comes to knowledge in the objective domain, we have to think about provisionality, okay? All science is provisional, okay? This is what we believe until we learn different. The only thing that is non-provisional is math. That will never change, okay? So we have to be humble. We have to understand that we might change our view of the science as we learn new things, but we can't just change it because we don't like it. In the subjective domain, we have felt experience. We have the arts. I mentioned poetry before, right? Poetry is a wonderful way to learn about ourselves, to learn about the world, as is literature, as are movies. And oh, by the way, I appreciate the call out to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, my true passion project. So you can find it at the enneagraminamovie.com. All right. Faith-based assumptions, right? Again, they're a subjective thing. We believe or we don't. Okay? Assumed beliefs, taste, okay? And finally, opinions. These are all things that are subjective, right? A good thinker understands that there are these two things and separates them in the way that we understand them, uses the right tools for the right task, okay? Having a critical thinking toolkit is really, really important, okay? Each domain uses different tools, right? We suffer when we conflate the two. And if we want to know, we have to understand what kind of epistemic task we are facing, and then what tools we should use to do so, okay? So if we are asking ourselves the question, do I love this person, right? There's no logic involved in that. Or if we're asking, why do we love this person? There's no logical answer. There's no scientific answer. We can describe what happens biologically in people when they're experiencing the feeling of love, but it doesn't explain why we love, okay? There are certain things that, are just not objective questions, all right? So we have to know the right tools. All right, I'll get to why this applies to the Enneagram shortly, so hang in there with me, okay? So in my training, we identify 6 qualities of the mind, okay? And one of them is called the discerning mind, right? It's the ability to analyze our thoughts and observations, synthesize our thoughts and observations into the context of our knowledge, and create new categories. There's a great book by a woman named Ellen Langer called Mindfulness. I encourage people, if you're interested in understanding yourself and other people better, that you pick up that book and read it. She talks about this idea of, constant category creation. As we learn more things, we expand the way we frame things, we expand the way we think about them, okay? So this is what the discerning mind does. It's that part of our mind that steps back and says, hey, think about this, don't forget that, put this into this box, put that into that box. Now, again, it's only one of 6 qualities of the mind, okay? But it's one that's really important and we need to learn to use, all right? Okay, now, I have a way of thinking about obstacles to clear thinking, okay? And if we look at this diagram on the left of our screen, these are obstacles to clear thinking. And they fall into these 5 categories. The first one is the built-in biases of the brain. And when I teach my clients, whether they're corporate clients or whether they're people in our training programs, we learn this model, okay? Because if you want to see clearly, and that's what the Enneagram is all about, helping us see ourselves and other people more clearly, then we have to understand that the brain has this wiring that makes it difficult for us to see the world clearly, okay? We have not evolved to see clearly. We have evolved to survive instead. And so we often see things in a distorted way. And every wisdom tradition tells us this, right? The Apostle Paul said, we see the world as through a glass darkly, okay? The Buddhists talk about illusion. There's a Sufi saying about coming into the world with 75 veils of illusion, right? And the work that we do is to learn to peel back those veils of illusion, okay? The work of every spiritual tradition is to see clearly, okay? We can do that when we understand these built-in biases. I'll talk more about those in a moment. Personality is the second layer, our Enneagram type, okay? I am an Enneagram type 8. It is a filter on the way I see the world, okay? A lot of times we're really good at recognizing other people's filters, right? I can see Lindsay's filter, I can see Claire's filter, I can see Kathleen's filter, etc. But we often don't see our own. So we have to remind ourselves, my personality is a filter that stops me from seeing clearly. Culture is another layer, okay? I just came from a certification program that we're doing. And we had, we have people in that program from 5 continents, okay? We have people who speak multiple languages. Each one of us brings our culture whether it be our geographic culture, our religious culture, our social culture, etc., to the way we see the world, and it can be a filter. Then we have ignorance, those things we simply don't know, okay? And our ignorance often serves as a filter because we don't see the things that other people might see or that we could see had we knowledge, okay? I always feel bad for people who, have never read any Shakespeare, for example. I feel bad. So I got to see The Godfather last Wednesday on a big screen, okay? I'm a big fan of the movie The Godfather, and I've seen it more times than I can count, and I get it, every time I get a chance to see it, and I've got to see it twice on the big screen so far. And my heart breaks for people who stare at me blankly when I say, take the gun, but leave the cannoli, right? Right? It's not personal, it's just business, right? I mean, if people don't get, I weep for them, okay? So this is what ignorance can be. It can stop us from seeing the world that other people are seeing or that is really out there. And then finally, there is misinformation. And I think, quite frankly, this is the biggest threat to us as a species right now. We have all the information in the world in this little device in our pocket, and most of it is wrong, and most of us don't know how to tell what's wrong and what's not, okay? And so I think we can trace a lot of the challenges in society to that very fact these days, okay? So we need something to overcome these obstacles, okay? So in the first circle here, we have antidotes and guardrails. These are tools that help us overcome our biases, okay? Understanding the Enneagram, what I do is I have a model called the awareness to action process that helps people kind of, work with their personality style a bit and not let it be as much of a filter. Culture mapping, understanding cultural dynamics and how they affect any group and how they affect us as a part. General education, right? I always work with my clients to work out a program for just educating yourself in a more broad way. And then finally, logic, reason, and debunking skills, okay? It's the first circle and the last circle that I want to focus on today, okay? And it's one of the things that I really think the Enneagram world needs to get better at dealing with. Because, and I'm going to be quite blunt here, and I think there's a whole lot of nonsense being peddled in the Enneagram world in the name of insight and depth and wisdom that's just bunk, okay? And I think that there's a lot of sloppy teaching that comes from not understanding cognitive biases and the way that the brain works. And I think there's a lot of things that get thrown out there as facts that survive because people don't know how to challenge and debunk nonsense, okay? So that's why I think these things are important. If we want the Enneagram to thrive and prosper, if we want to be able to use the Enneagram skillfully and effectively, we need to practice critical thinking and make sure that we're not peddling nonsense, okay? That's all it comes down to, all right? Nobody on this call or in this room are the object of my ire in this point. I just want to be quite clear, Catherine, I'm not talking about you here. So Catherine and I are old friends. That's why I'm picking on her here. So just so you all know, all right? Okay. Again, if there are questions as we go, please, go ahead and raise your hand, throw it in there, but I'm going to continue on until somebody stops me, okay? So built-in biases. Humans love stories, okay? The brain works to create stories, and the simpler those stories are, the better. So when we hear a story that makes a lot of sense for us, our brain sticks it, plants it there, and runs with it, okay? We hardly ever get into the habit of challenging our stories. This leads to what we call motivated reasoning. Motivated reasoning is the human tendency to work our way to the conclusion we want, okay? My favorite philosopher is David Hume, okay? Hume is just, this towering giant of critical thinking. And he challenged what at the time was the dominant perception that humans are rational. And what Hume said was, no, we're not. Okay, we make decisions based on our emotions, and then we use our intellect to justify what we feel like believing. Okay, now we don't do it all the time, but we do it most of the time. Okay, and this is at the heart of motivated reasoning. I want to believe something because it feels right, and then I go about finding the evidence for it. This causes us to experience cognitive dissonance, which is the stress we experience when we have competing or contradictory ideas in our head. Okay, great example of this. I think I am a good person. Okay, I think most of the things I do are well-intended and out to serve a good purpose. Okay. Sometimes my wife has the audacity to point out or to claim or to assert that I have done something that has hurt someone's feelings. And I'm just outraged by that because I am a good person. And so how could I have done something that made somebody feel, uncomfortable or a little bit of pain? All right. So what do? I rationalize, I justify, I explain away, or I deny, or I shift blame. These are all tools with dealing with the cognitive dissonance, this feeling I get when I think, you know what, she might be right. I might have been the jerk that she said I was in that experience. Okay. Now, what do we usually do? Sometimes we say, yeah, I did it and I admit it and I work on it. Okay. But a lot of times we just can't see those things that other people see. Our brain pushes them out of our mind. Okay. Our brain pushes evidence out of our mind if it contradicts with a belief we have. Okay. This is the result of cognitive dissonance. It does that because it does that in a couple of ways. Number one is through what are called system 1 and 2 thinking. Okay, system 1 is fast thinking, heuristic based. Boom, boom, boom. Right? Just our mind is doing things without us realizing it. And then there's system 2, which is the more thoughtful approach to things. If you want to learn more about this, look into Daniel Kahneman's work about system 1, system 2 thinking. Okay, I don't have time to get into that here. But the key thing to understand here is falling victim to cognitive biases. All right. This happens to all of us all the time. So I want to talk about these, and then I want to talk about how they affect the way we approach the Enneagram. Okay. Confirmation bias, the tendency to see what we expect to see and not see things that we don't expect to see. All right. I have 4 boys. My sons are awesome. My sons are probably the best kids ever. Okay. It seems that there are people out there who might not share that point of view all the time, right? Who point out that sometimes, you know what, your kid can be a little bit whiny sometimes, or your kid can be a little bit this or a little bit that. I don't see those things, right? I don't see things about them that don't fit my model of them. Now, with other people's kids, boy, oh boy, do I see what little jerks they are, okay? Even though their parents might not see it. Now, this extends in lots of different ways. When I was early on when I was studying the Enneagram back in the 90s, I went to the Riso Hudson training, okay? And we were talking about subtypes. And I thought at the time that I was a self-pres 8, okay, self-preservation 8. And I had all sorts of evidence for it. I had all sorts of rationale and details to support that point of view. And at one point, Don Riso walks over to me and he says, Mario, have you figured out your subtype yet? And I said, yeah, I'm a self-pres 8. He says, no, you're not. You're social. And then he just walks away. All right. Now, that's, a big no-no in the Enneagram world, but, he was Don Riso and I wasn't. So I paid attention to what he had to say. And I started to realize that he was absolutely right. But because I had fixated on a couple of behaviors, I was expanding that in my mind, saying, well, I'm clearly self-pres because I do this, this, and this. But I was missing all the other stuff, right? Because the brain falls into confirmation bias. Now, if we are teaching the Enneagram, if we are studying the Enneagram, it is easy to make assumptions, okay, based on a confirmation bias. I had some Enneagram teachers tell me one time or post something on social media that all 8s have big chins and strong jaws. Okay. And I was a little confused by that. And they said that if 8s think, if somebody thinks they're an 8, but they don't have a big chin, then they're, either a 6 or a 9. And I thought, I'm pretty sure I'm an 8, but I don't have a big chin, right? I wear facial hair because I don't have, what I think is an adequate chin. All right. So, so I asked them, and they just could not get out of their head that, well, you can't be an 8 if you don't have a big chin, right? And they point to all these 8s who have big chins. This is confirmation bias at work. And I see it all the time. We have this view, oh, well, 7s never get sad. So Catherine's sad. She can't be a 7. Okay. Again, confirmation bias. It locks in small ways of thinking. At an Enneagram conference years ago, at one prior to offending Clare, I was talking to someone who came up to me and said that he had read my book and wanted to share some thoughts with me. And I said, okay, fine. So we're talking. And what he really wanted to do was get me to read some article that he had written. Okay. And so he hands me the article and he said, now look, I know 8s don't read, but it's a short article, so I'd love some feedback, And I'm thinking, I wrote a book, okay? You mentioned it to me. You said you read it, and you're assuming I don't read. Well, this guy, his wife was an 8, and she didn't like to read. So he went on from there that 8s don't read, which takes us to, I'm going to skip one here and talk about the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error is we take one behavior and we extrapolate from that. Okay. If you're in a bad mood, I assume you are a grouchy person instead of just a regular pleasant person who's in a bad mood that day. Okay. If you do something rude toward me because you're having a bad day, I assume that you are a jerk. Okay. Rather than just thinking, well, you know what, Lindsay's having a bad day. Okay. People do this all the time when it comes to the Enneagram. We take one characteristic, we focus on it, we fixate on it, and we assume everything about the person from that. This is the cause of so much mistyping in the Enneagram world, right? Oh, look, she laughed. She must be a 7. Oh, look, she offered me a glass of water. She must be a 2, right? Whatever it is. Okay. So we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions this way. Finally, the availability heuristic, that's a tendency to rely on a recent or closely available piece of information to make a judgment. Oh, well, I know a 7 and the 7 does that as well. So you're probably a 7. Or, I have a friend who's a 2 and she does that kind of work. So you must be a 2 as well. All right. So we jump to these shortcuts that lead us to not think accurately. If you want to be a skillful Enneagram teacher, a skillful user of the Enneagram, start learning about cognitive biases, and you can easily see how they affect your teaching. All right. I'm going to move on. 5 essential tools. If you want to be a better human being, a better citizen, or a better Enneagram teacher or student, I think these things are really useful. Number 1 is skepticism. Okay. I recently heard some Enneagram teachers making a claim that they think that the Enneagram may be 30,000 years old. Okay. Call me skeptical. Okay. I want to see evidence of that. All right. And this is what skepticism about. It's not about not believing anything. It's expecting to see evidence that supports a claim. And the bigger the claim is, the more there needs to be evidence supporting it. My wife and I were in New York one time. We were walking on Madison Avenue at 72nd Street, which is right where the Ralph Lauren headquarters is, right? Or the flagship store in New York. And so we're walking along, and out the door comes Bruce Springsteen. Okay. carrying a couple of shopping bags. It was a few weeks before Christmas. Clearly, Bruce needed to get some things for his wife and kids, so he decided to go to the Ralph Lauren store. He walked, within 2 feet of us, and I said to my wife, "Hey, look, it's Bruce Springsteen." And he turns to me and he says, "Hey, how you doing?" In that Bruce Springsteen sort of way. And then he gets into the back of the car and rides off. Okay. Now, you can choose to believe that story or not. Okay. You might be saying, "Well, I don't know about this Mario guy. I've heard bad things. He tends to make crap up. So this is probably just another story," right? Or you can say, "Well, it could happen. It's reasonable," right? And you may not require a lot of proof. Okay. But if I claim that Bruce Springsteen is my best friend and I've given him most of his ideas, and in fact, he's kind of stolen a lot of songs from me, and I really should be getting those royalties, this is a bigger claim and we need more evidence. Okay. So skepticism is learning to associate the claim, or to base your belief in a claim on the evidence available to you. Okay. One of the big challenges that seekers after truth tend to have is they tend to be kind of gullible. Okay. They tend to say, "You know what, this person's teaching the Enneagram. The Enneagram's so powerful that this stuff that sounds kind of crazy must be true." Okay. Please, please, please be skeptical and be challenging of anything, not only that you hear from others, but of anything that you repeat to other people. Okay. So skepticism is tool number 1. Occam's Razor is tool number 2. I'm a huge, huge fan of Occam, right? So Occam was a medieval theologian and philosopher who came up with the principle that we should not add variables unnecessarily. Okay. Now, Occam's Razor is often interpreted as the simple explanation is usually the right one. That's not really what Occam was saying. What he was saying is, if you can explain something in 2 steps, don't add a 3rd step. Okay, very simple. People love to make the Enneagram really, really complicated, right? Oh, let's add this new element. Let's add this. Let's add this triad. Let's add this piece, et cetera, et cetera. Weigh these things carefully. Okay. Very often what I find is that people are adding things because they don't understand the first principles effectively. All right. So always apply Occam's Razor. Okay. Humility. Beware of overconfidence. Okay. Always, always, always tell yourself, "I could be wrong." All right. This one is hard for me. Okay. I got to tell you right up, this is the one I struggle with the most. Okay. Because I always just assume I am right. Okay. If I wouldn't believe it if it wasn't true. If I believe it, it must be true. Okay. So this is one that we all have to work on. And I will say that I am the first amongst us here. Okay. Probabilistic thinking, or thinking probabilistically. I always tell people when I teach the Enneagram that the Enneagram is not a predictive model. It is a probabilistic model. All right. It means that once we know somebody's type, we have a better sense of how they might react to something, but we can never predict. All right. A lot of times people are afraid to tell me something because, "Oh, he's an 8 and he can be short-tempered and he can be hard to talk to, et cetera, et cetera." And then I surprise them, and I'm open-minded and I'm accepting, and I'm, all these things that you're supposed to be when people share ideas with me. Just because I'm an 8 doesn't mean I'm going to blow my stack and kill the bearer of bad news, right? But it helps to remember that, well, he is an 8, so let's keep that in mind as we go. All right. Same thing with any trait of that we associate with Enneagram types. Okay. Show me a 5 that loves to read, and I'll show you 5s that don't read. Okay. Not every 5's a reader, but probably more 5s are readers than are not. Okay. And in fairness to that guy who approached me at the conference, I know lots of 8s who are not readers, but I got a whole bunch of books in my house. Okay. I've even read some of them. So we always have to think in terms of probability rather than assuming that this is a model that has laws involved. Okay, there are no laws associated with the Enneagram. There's only probabilities. All right. Okay, I got a couple more points I want to make here, and then I'll open to questions. Falsification, scientific principle. We always have to be careful if we're making claims, whether they're falsifiable or not. The Enneagram is a model that's not falsifiable. That's okay, right? I can't prove it. I can't disprove it, but it works. All right. And I have to hold it lightly. And it doesn't explain everything. You know, sometimes people will say to me, well, you know, I tend to like, 70s disco music. What type am I? Right. I don't know. Right. Maybe your, mother dropped you on your head when you were a kid, and that explains it. I don't know. Okay. There are certain claims about the Enneagram we have to be careful about making because we just don't know. Childhood origins is another one. Okay. Oh, I'm a 2 because this happened in my childhood. You can't prove that, right? It's non-falsifiable. All right. So hold those ideas lightly. All right. Here's the magic question to ask yourself. Okay. How do I know this to be true? Okay. This is something I tell my business clients all the time. It's something I tell my coaching clients. It's something I tell the people who go through our trainings. How do I know this to be true? This thing that I believe, this thing that I hold dearly, this assumption that I'm making, how do I know it to be true? How can I disprove it? Okay. If I can disprove it, do I have the intellectual integrity to let it go? Okay. There's a lot of ideas about the Enneagram out there that have just endured because people are not willing to let them go. All right. We have to always be asking questions when people make claims about the Enneagram, when people make claims about the different Enneagram types. Is this my experience? How do I know this to be true? How can I test it? How can I find evidence that contradicts it? Okay. If you get into asking this question over and over and over again all the time, you will get closer to truth. Okay. It is by whittling away the things that are untrue that we get closer to what is true. All right. So if you take nothing else from this, take this question. Okay. How do I know this to be true? All right. With that, I just want to say I'll open it up for questions. I want to say if you want a copy of these slides, send me an email at Mario@Sikora. I'm happy to send it to you. I also got a little book on Amazon you can get called How to Think Well and Why. That has a lot of this material in it, so you can get a copy of it. I think the Kindle version is just a few bucks, so you can get that. Okay. So with that, Claire, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And, if there are any questions, happy to address them.
Thank you, Mario. You have given us something to think about. And I actually wanted to know what descriptive words would you use, and you don't have to do this today, for each of the styles, thinking style. So you used 1, 4, and 7 and how they would approach thinking. But, I would love to hear those descriptives for each of the styles when they're thinking clearly. So don't have to do it today, and I'll open it up for others with questions unless Mario wants to take that on.
Yeah, well, let me just say briefly there, because I don't have an answer to that for all 9 of them. And when I show that diagram, I'm kind of using the Enneagram there as a model of human nature rather than a model of types, right? Now, clearly, we kind of associate rigor with type 1s, okay? But this doesn't mean that all 1s are rigorous, right? Just like not all 4s are creative. I've met some 4s who really are just not interested in creativity. And I've even met some 7s who really aren't that curious in a lot of ways, right? So for me, I see those as good kind of qualities that apply to all of us. But it is an interesting thing to look at what are some of the common traps that different Enneagram types fall into around thinking. And that's something I will give some thought to, Claire, and get back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I actually, in a discernment practice that we do, it's kind of the capstone for our training, which is an Ignatian training along with the Enneagram, and works, that as you named, somatic and good EQ, good IQ, good GQ in the discernment process. And so we give a thinking style to each of the types that I'd love for you to take a look at and see if it resonates with you.
Yeah.
And then, what's happening in each of you as you're listening to these words of Mario's? How would you like to respond? What are you curious about? What's coming up for you? Yes, Catherine.
Well, first of all, the first thing that comes up for me is gratitude about being called again to be a scholar, be curious, be precise, be aware of the bullshit. I know I can't say that, but I just did. One thing that I have encountered over the years with teaching and learning is that there seems to be a gender bias. Now, I don't know why that should surprise me all of a sudden, but that the words of the male are taken with much more credibility than the words of the female. Now, that may be, because I just thought of that. I mean, that just came to me as I was listening to you, Mario, that I think I run into more skeptics, which is fine, than maybe you do, or David Daniels did, or Don Riso did. And I think it's a gender bias. So I'm just throwing that out there to, again, give us something to raise our awareness of when we're teaching. Are we wading through that bias? Are we falling victim to it? All those, just to kind of bring it up in our awareness, because I think it exists. So that it wasn't a question, it was my rant. Yeah, a tiny rant.
So I'll give, since that wasn't a question, I'll give a non-answer to it.
Okay.
So, there are studies that show in the presence of forceful and confident people, part of our neocortex sort of goes to sleep, right? So basically what that means is when the alpha character is asserting something, we fall into this sort of intellectual coma and sort of embrace it, right? And and there are evolutionary reasons for that, because the alpha was usually the more experienced one, and so we've evolved to sort of shut down. But we don't live in that environment anymore, right? So we have this biological vestige of a phenomena that in this case biases us to listen to charismatic people, assertive and self-confident people. And in our society, we tend to associate those things more with men than we do with women, and et cetera. So your point is absolutely valid and true. And it's another thing we need to guard against.
And I just want to mention something about cults.
Mm-hmm.
They're led by men,
mm-hmm.
by and large.
By and large, yes.
I mean, not you.
Catherine.
I'm working on it, Catherine.
No.
Yeah, any other good percolating noticings here? That was great, Catherine. Thank you so much.
Thank you for providing the platform for all of this. Thank you.
Okay. I saw Michelle raise her hand first, and then I see Natalie has her hand up, so we can.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed listening to you. I especially resonate with your comment about confirmation bias, because over the COVID period, I I dove into writing some creative nonfiction that just kind of mapped out my whole journey with the Enneagram and all of that. And but when I was first introduced to the Enneagram, the 4 resonated with me so well. And so as I wrote, I'm thinking, yeah, this is a 4, this is a 4. And then something led me to take an online Enneagram test, I guess, just to see what kind of questions they had. And it came out a 9. And I'm thinking, oh my God, confirmation bias at work here. And it's like, am I really a 9 or am I 4? And it's like, so I have a background in math. I was a math major. I don't know if this is working like too much, but my comment is that sometimes I think we can like do the being self-doubting, using our awareness of confirmation bias like too much. Like I've come back to my 4-ness, but there for a while I was like, oh no, confirmation bias. So how do you catch yourself and like draw the line and know when to go with your gut instinct rather than think it too much, Yeah.
So great question, right? So some things, there are problems or questions in life that are linear in nature and some that are nonlinear. Okay. A linear question is just math. Okay. A plus B plus C, we can follow the evidence and it gives us a fixed answer. Okay. And then there are nonlinear problems, and nonlinear problems are, what Enneagram type am I? How do I figure that out, right? We can't rely on the tests because you could take 6 tests and come up 7 different types, right? So, and I can find all of them in myself if I look and find evidence for it and that sort of thing. So, my advice is always do as much of the linear work as you can, and then trust your gut, okay? And then hold it lightly. And if new evidence comes up, then you follow the evidence. And the important thing is to remember that it doesn't really matter what your Enneagram type is. It matters what your understanding of the Enneagram tells you about yourself. Okay. So whether you're a 4, a 9, or a 6, or whatever it is, what is causing you to suffer? Okay. And how can the Enneagram illuminate that in some way? And how can you resolve it? Okay. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, right. Thanks.
Okay.
Beautiful. We're a little bit over time, but Natalie, we're going to end with your question.
Oh, sure. And it's not even a question. I just wanted to thank Mario so much for modeling for us the provocative, fun teaching style that he has. So as a 7, I want to be able to practice that. So really appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Wonderful.
Claire, can we hear from Lindsay? Can we hear from Lindsay if you don't mind?
Of course. Go ahead, Linz.
Hi, can you hear me? I had some audio troubles today.
Breaking up a bit, Lindsay, but go ahead.
Are we good? Okay, I'll do my best. I just wanted to mention that I really felt myself soften around the idea of humility. Claire, with your comment in the beginning about we're all learning from each other, and then Mario with your transparency around working on humility as a regular practice. I find myself in a lot of situations where people kind of want me to turn tricks for them with the Enneagram, and they want me to impress them, and they want me to give them some new revelation that they haven't seen on Instagram yet. And I just feel so much pressure sometimes, and so I felt my whole body and whole self just soften around this reminder that this is slow work that requires patience and humility, and that was a wonderful reminder for me today. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right. Great.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just want to say thank you, Mario, for this time. And, one of the reasons, and those who've been with us before, you notice that I don't typically put my Rev in front of my name. And I used my Rev today for that very point that Lindsay just made. And that is, how are we learning from others that are not from our own stream of understanding? And how are we broadening that, way of learning in the world so that we actually can cohabitate in a civilized in a civilized culture, so that we don't see one another as the other. But what can Mario teach me as he pushes back on the overuse of spirituality, or even the different definitions of spirituality that are used, right? And how can we bring in the voice of others so that we become people who are not one-dimensional, and are able to understand our own confirmation bias, and so I just thank you. That I want to say thank you for doing that since 2012 for me, Mario, and it continues. And I welcome the work that you're doing, and thank you for it.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate those kind words. And and again, I hope that I'm being clear here that my work is not anti-spiritual in some way, right? My work is anti-fuzzy. It's anti, and it's a way to push us forward. I have huge respect, for you and your work, Claire. I think, like I said on Facebook, at the bottom of that rant, you're one of the people that I have a lot of regard for. And so I appreciate the conversation.
We do too. And so follow Mario wherever you need to, whether it's with movies, the Enneagram movie podcast, it's all the links are in the chat, or Awareness to Action, or the brand new website. What is it?
MarioSikora.com. Yes.
Excellent. And Mario will answer to either Mario or Mario. But we came up with a song, didn't we, Danielle?
Oh yeah.
Let's get Mario. We want to get Mario.
Oh my.
So thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you next month. And you know how to get a hold of Mario and Great Lakes with any questions you have. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank y'all so much. This was wonderful.
All right.
Have a great day. Bye.